Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all here this morning, people who are joining us here in person in the room and online, to the 8th Annual Sentinel Initiative Public Workshop, which is being convened by the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy, supported by a cooperative agreement with the FDA. I'm Mark McClellan. I'm the director of the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy. You all probably know us in previous years from our work convening this workshop as part of the Brookings Institution's health policy efforts. We are very pleased to continue to work with FDA, the Sentinel Coordinating Center, and all of the data partners in our new initiatives at Duke. Now in its 8th year, the Sentinel program and this annual event associated with it has become quite an establishment. But it's taken a lot of work to where we are to get to where we are today, and even more importantly, there are a lot of opportunities ahead, moving from possibilities and potential to delivering tangible results and to creating a more strong set of possibilities for the future is quite a journey, as many of you in this room can fully attest. You all know that the Sentinel Initiative began as the result of passage of the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act back in 2007. That act mandated that the Food and Drug Administration develop a national electronic system to track the safety of regulated medical products, a form of active surveillance on whole populations that at the time was an important new step in post-market evidence on prescription drugs. In response to this charge, the FDA launched the Sentinel Initiative right after in 2008. Mini Sentinel, that pilot version of the Sentinel Initiative, utilized electronic health data, including health insurance claims and other electronic clinical data from a network of partners through the development of a common data model and a shared governance for turning the analytic products of that data into meaningful insights. This common data model and the analyses associated with it has formed the basis for Sentinel's distributed analytic architecture. As of August 2015, the Sentinel system contains data and permits analyses on drug safety surveillance issues on about 200 million individuals, representing about 5.5 billion unique medical encounters of observations related to drug safety surveillance. Sentinel has established the infrastructure for conducting rapid, active surveillance in near real time on this data system. That infrastructure has allowed Sentinel as well to conduct some increasingly in-depth analyses called protocol-based assessments using data from a significant part of the U.S. population, all while relying on a distributed model, keeping the data that's used in healthcare delivery at home in the systems that need it for treating patients and improving patient care. Over the last 8 years, it's been quite a journey to see the Sentinel Initiative change from this kind of vision to a reality, a major force in drug safety surveillance in the United States. And now, with the growing interest and opportunities to further leverage real-world evidence to improve the quality and the value of healthcare, Sentinel is an integral component, a foundation for our nation's learning health system. With the emphasis on better utilizing real-world evidence, a key part of current legislative efforts as well, such as the 21st Century Cures Act and the upcoming PDUFA and MDUFA legislative reauthorizations, we have a unique opportunity to continue to build on this foundation. Sentinel has laid a foundation that enables us to explore new and innovative uses of data from real-world practice, and we're going to hear more about those possibilities later today. As Sentinel continues to mature, it will also be vitally important for the public not only to be aware of this system, but to help identify and find the best path forward for this unique set of capabilities to learn about safety issues and develop other types of evidence that can help improve care for all Americans. And these are some of the big picture themes that we'll be covering throughout the day. And that's a good transition for me to provide a brief overview of the agenda. First, we're going to hear from Janet Woodcock, the director of the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, on her perspective on the Sentinel Initiative's progress to date, I think especially knowing Janet, the vision for the future. Next, we'll hear from FDA's leadership across CDER and CBER and CDRH on the value that Sentinel and the principles behind Sentinel bring to different centers and what the agency has in store for this program and other extensions that can work with it as efforts move forward to learn more about evidence from real-world practice. For the rest of the morning, we'll be exploring how the Sentinel system is specifically being used by the FDA. Rich Platt, who's the PI of the Sentinel system, is going to provide his annual State of Sentinel presentation. That'll give a background on Sentinel, and it will highlight some of the major projects, especially from the past year, along with some of the innovative methods and tools being developed that can permit further advances in system capabilities for the future. Rich's presentation will set up the two sessions that follow. First, we'll take a deep dive into some specific uses of Sentinel, where we'll hear from leads on the Sentinel program at FDA from CDER and CBER about some of the major safety evaluations illustrating how the Sentinel initiative has been used recently. Then we'll hear from more Sentinel experts on how new data sources and methods development are advancing these system capabilities further. After a lunch break, we're going to turn to our focus on the future of Sentinel, exploring potential new uses and new users of Sentinel's data infrastructure for purposes going beyond safety surveillance. We're pleased to have with us for that senior leaders from FDA, CDC, NIH, PCORI, and the Reagan-Udall Foundation, part of the many organizations that are coming together now to find better ways to learn from the data systems that support healthcare, electronic healthcare in this country. Lastly, we'll hear from a broad array of stakeholders, patients, consumers, providers, payers, and manufacturers for feedback on what they've heard throughout the day, as well as their thoughts on how to move the Sentinel system forward, since this is, after all, a very broad public-private collaboration that only works because of the shared commitment of all of the stakeholders in our healthcare system. We're fortunate as part of this effort to have the set of speakers with us today. So I think there's a lot to learn and a lot of ideas and new perspectives that are going to be exchanged at this meeting. But I want to emphasize that this is not only an opportunity for the public to hear about what's going on with Sentinel from FDA and the other stakeholders who are involved, but also an opportunity for thoughtful questions and comments. In past meetings, the topics that have come up here at this meeting have had an important impact on further development and ideas to make the Sentinel system and other systems like it that rely on real-world evidence work even more effectively. So we welcome all of you who are taking the time and effort to be here today, both in person and online, and there will be some opportunities for questions, comments as the day progresses. I want to quickly go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, while this is a public meeting and the event is being broadcast online, everything you say will be part of the record. As you'll note on the agenda, there will be a number of panelists who will help kick off each session. And again, there will be time after those initial discussions and discussions among the panel participants for questions. We're going to have a couple of microphones in the front of the room where those of you who are in the room can come up to ask questions and make comments. As a heads up to panelists, we'll have one of our staff members, Serena Coates. Serena, raise your hand. There you are. Sitting up front. She will help you keep track of the time during your presentation. So look at those time cards. And for those of you who are here, feel free to help yourself to coffee and beverages throughout the day. They're located in the back area of the room. After we finish our morning sessions, there will be a lunch break. There are a number of restaurants close by. I think we've got a list of nearby restaurants included in the reminder email that we sent yesterday, and you can also ask our staff right out at the registration desk out front for any recommendations. You're also welcome to bring food back here to the room for the afternoon session. So that's an overview of some of the basic logistics for the day. And now I'd like to get straight to our program by introducing our keynote speaker, Janet Woodcock, the director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at FDA. Janet has been a tremendous force in FDA for a long time. Her visionary leadership in particular has been key to the development of the Sentinel initiative, which grew out of that pilot project I mentioned before, and even before that grew out of a vision that Janet helped develop for how these kinds of evidence systems could be used, drawing from a very diverse healthcare system, not only for safety surveillance, but for other important evidence questions as well. We're going to hear more about those applications later in the day, but I can't think of anybody better to start off this meeting and provide an overview of where we are headed, where we're headed than Janet. Janet, thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. I see people who've been on this journey with us for the last 8 years. And thank you all for sticking with us, and thanks to everyone else who's come to learn about this. It really is hard to believe it's been 8 years that we've been building this initiative. But FDA, since our launch in 2008, we've been committed and remain committed to making this happen. We've had a successful mini Sentinel pilot, and we have now transitioned, I can declare, mini Sentinel to a fully functioning Sentinel system, which was kind of the vision and body that Congress directed us to do those 8 years ago. And Mark McClellan really had, I think, a big hand in getting that legislation enacted and the directions for us to do this. So we have really accomplished a lot, and in the last year, we've not only transitioned to Sentinel, but we've really begun to institutionalize Sentinel as an integral part of our safety surveillance, a more routine and integral part of overall safety surveillance of drugs, biologics, and so forth. And the success is really shared by many of you here, because this was a huge collaborative effort. Too many names to mention and count have contributed to this and are continuing to contribute because of the nature of the data that we draw from and the scientific processes. This has truly been a collaboration across a lot of different sectors. And we also needed a lot of scientific input for the methods, and that's still something that really needs continued development, is scientific effort on how do we best analyze the data that we get. So we've also developed needed infrastructure and governance, and this is something we focused on from the start. And Rachel Sherman and Melissa Robb, who I don't know whether they're here today, but they really focused from the beginning on making this something that would be acceptable to the public, that would be, we had a lot of public input, that governance would be transparent and people would understand that we were taking care of those important concerns of privacy and safety of the data and so forth. But we really want to now enable other groups to leverage the work done in Sentinel, as Mark has alluded to already. We want the infrastructure that's available to be used, hopefully, in the future for other purposes, such as public health activities, other public health activities, research activities, perhaps quality improvement activities. And I think we've seen some of this already. So we've not only built an infrastructure that we can use for safety surveillance, we hope that the infrastructure part of Sentinel will be something that can be a foundation or utilized for many purposes. So Mini Sentinel gave us an important start, but we've continued to learn a lot over the past year as we've transitioned from the Mini Sentinel pilot to the official Sentinel system. But we can, as of today, officially drop Mini from Sentinel, and now we will refer to it as the Sentinel system because it is up and running as a operational part of our safety surveillance system. So before talking about the future and where we need to go with this, I want to take a step back and talk about what has happened over the last year to make this occur. And you're going to hear some of this in more detail during the day. What we have done operationally is transitioned management and development of the Sentinel program, sort of the nexus of it, from CDER's Office of Medical Policy to CDER's Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. Now, Sentinel is a partnership between CBER and CDER, but we had to have one sort of operational location, so that's in the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. OSE has always been participating in Sentinel, but now we're going to grow the program within OSE because we seek to operationalize it in safety surveillance. We've established needed policies, procedures, and organization to move us from the development phase to the routine operational phase. We're working with CBER to expand their vaccine and blood product surveillance capabilities under their post-market rapid immunization safety monitoring program, otherwise known as PRISM, and the blood surveillance continuous active network, or blood scan, to specific activities which show how we can look at specific groups of products within Sentinel and have sort of programs underneath the overall umbrella. We're also coordinating with CDRH, the Device Center, to leverage the Sentinel infrastructure to complement the National Evaluation System for Medical Devices and NESMD. Obviously, there are going to be some issues in incorporating devices fully into this because of lack of identification of devices in some of the records that are used. But the future, I think, would be to integrate as Devices has been doing, and we're really excited about working with the Device Center on that. And to meet the Amendments Act 2007 mandate that Mark referred to and prevent confusion, okay, we have stood up what we call the Active Risk Identification and Analysis System, or ARIA, and those words are the words that are used in the statute that we had to implement, an active risk identification analysis system. We view that as a subcomponent of the Sentinel system that is specifically directed at that statutory mandate. But we view this Sentinel as broader than that. And that way we can keep our legislative mandate straight. Okay, but that will be doing that safety analysis that we have been doing. So ARIA uses the existing modular analysis methods in the Sentinel infrastructure to evaluate safety signals. And it's a key component of integrating Sentinel into our routine regulatory processes. Now, we've expanded access to healthcare data, as you just heard from Mark. So now we have about 193 million members in data and about 351 million person years of observation time, and we hope this will keep growing over time. We've brought the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts and Hospital Corporation of America in as data partners, and both have transformed their data into the Sentinel Common Data Model. And HCA provides access from inpatient hospitalization, including medications and transfusions, a critical part of our healthcare system that we need more information and visibility into. So that's very exciting. Additionally, we've started the process of integrating the Medicare Virtual Research Data Center into Sentinel, and that will give us better access in Sentinel on data on patients over 65 who are in Medicare. Additionally, we started the process, also we're working with PCORnet, Clinical Data Research Network partners who are Sentinel collaborators. So we're trying to reach out to all parties that are doing these types of activities, integrate them to the extent possible, and we will continue to work on this type of integration. Maybe linkage, maybe mergers, we'll have to see, but whatever is appropriate given the circumstances of the parties. In 2015, and you're going to hear more about this, FDA had 17 active protocol-based assessments. That's where we actually wrote a protocol to do an evaluation, including from CBER and CDER, and we used the rapid query capabilities of Sentinel to run close to 2,000 different scenarios in Sentinel. So this is becoming an instrument that we can rapidly turn to answer certain questions or get more insight into safety problems. Now, as mandated by PDUFA 5, which is the user fee negotiations, okay, I know I'm using a lot of acronyms here, but the last user fee negotiations, we were asked to perform an interim assessment of the Sentinel program. And that's a good idea. The assessment evaluated the strengths, the limitations, and the uses of Sentinel, at that time, mini Sentinel, to inform regulatory actions related to safety issues. And the report really did highlight our accomplishments and gave us some recommendations for improving Sentinel, and we are working on those recommendations and how we would implement them. And the Sentinel interim assessment was posted in September 2015 in the PDUFA 5 section of the FDA.gov website. Good luck finding it, but you could Google it. And, you know, for those of you who want to know at that point, at that snapshot in time, what was the assessment of how the system was performing. Now, so that's what we've done. We've been very busy with this transition. I think we're all, you know, it's gone very well. We're very pleased with it. Trying to talk about the future of the Sentinel program. We're going to continue to develop this in stages as we have been doing. We want to continue to expand our access to new data types. We will continue to also develop analytic methods to enhance our safety surveillance capabilities, and especially the speed, which is always very important when safety questions arise. And that would mean we have a good menu of analytical methods we can use to tailor to the problem at hand. There's always seems to be different nuances to every different safety problem that arises. We're committed to supporting the development of a national resource. And what do I mean with that? I've presented this, as Mark was more or less alluding to, at every Sentinel meeting like this from the beginning. Okay, is that if we develop this, and we were happy to do the infrastructure, the common data model, the data partners and everything, we have no pride of ownership. We don't want this to be used for Sentinel alone. This is a national resource, and we're continuing to push forward on trying to explore how other researchers can also use this resource, and how can this be shaped into something that can be used to answer many questions about healthcare, and there are many to answer. And of course, we're also working with PCORnet and with PCORI on trying to figure out how we can link their capabilities with Sentinel capabilities. So we would like to work with all of you here and others to really create that national data infrastructure so that other government agencies, academic researchers, industry researchers can access the digital data in a form that meets their needs to answer the questions that they have. And we'll keep pressing on that. We're committed to that. So I think that's a very exciting possibility, because one of the things we have done by building Sentinel is done the proof of concept. This is doable. It can yield actionable information, and it can do it fairly rapidly and reasonably reliably. And so, you know, it shows that this can be done, and we can build on it. We need to focus on this sort of capability, not just for observational studies, but this will be outside of ARIA, but for randomized trials in this real-world setting. Because once this infrastructure is established, and particularly as we have access to medical records in various ways that protect privacy and so forth, there's also opportunities to conduct randomized studies to answer questions that really aren't amenable to being answered by observational studies. So we're working with PCORnet, the NIH Collaboratory, and CDRH's program that also have similar goals and objectives to use real-world evidence, as Mark said, for robust answers by conducting randomization. This creates a whole another set of issues around informed consent and all these sorts of things, but we believe these are manageable, and I think the NIH Collaboratory has done some work that shows you can do very cost-effective randomized trials and get answers that are really important to healthcare. So we are totally on board with that, and not only on board, we're actually trying to push this along. And we're also at the very early stages of developing what we call the Guardian system. The Guardian would be our use of the Sentinel infrastructure for slightly different aims, to actively gather information about the performance of regulated medical products out in healthcare beyond the safety questions that are being asked by Sentinel. But it would rely on the Sentinel infrastructure for part of its operations. So that would be our piece of what we foresee many parties doing, is utilizing this infrastructure for various purposes. And of course, this would help us all. We're constantly racked by questions about the performance of medical products that are not answerable in a fast enough time to get the answers we need. And many of the parties and stakeholders represented in this audience have the same objectives. So in the next 5 years, can we put together a system that can efficiently answer those questions that are needed using the tools, whether it's randomization, observational studies, registries, whatever, long-term cohort studies, whatever it might be, using the appropriate tools. I have 0 time and I'm done, so thank you. So that's the long-term vision. Now, in summary, Sentinel has become an important part of our routine safety surveillance. We hope that active surveillance piece, as drugs come and they get approved and they go through the pre-market evaluation, we get on the market, we're watching them. That was the original vision. We're watching those newly approved drugs. But we have to better utilize and understand the further uses, both for regulatory and then for other uses. In addition, on the practical side, we're going to enhance the Sentinel infrastructure. We need to enhance the scientific methods and enhance our staff expertise, and actually our numbers of our staff, okay, that work on this project in order to fully operationalize it. And then we will, over the next year, you're going to see an unfolding, I think, of heightening our efforts to developing this national resource, this national infrastructure for answering questions, for generating evidence about medical products. So that's very exciting. So it's been a great journey so far. I again thank all of you who've been with us and contributed for the last 8 years, and I look forward to all the work to come and really pay off for the public. Thank you.
Janet, thank you very much for those opening comments and for doing a great job for setting the tone. While I'm introducing this next session, I'd like to ask all of the panelists for this next session to come on up on stage while I introduce them. That includes Janet, who you just heard from, also Gerald Delpan, the Director of the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and Steve Anderson, the Director of the Office of Biostatistics and Epidemiology at the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at FDA, and Greg Pappas, the Associate Director for National Device Surveillance at the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health at FDA. So Janet did a great job of providing context where we've been, where we are, where we're headed. Now we're going to hear from some of the other senior FDA leadership, really spanning across the agency, about the uses, the value of the Sentinel system today to the different centers, how it impacts FDA decisions and processes, and also where their perspectives on where we're heading from here. Some of the questions that we expect to address during this session include more details on how FDA is benefiting from its use of Sentinel, and by extension, the American public, how the Sentinel system is impacting the pre-market and post-market regulatory processes at FDA, and then once again, what's the path forward from here. So we're going to start with opening comments from each of the panelists, and then we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. Gerald, if you don't mind, go ahead with you.
So my opening comments are going to be very short. You've heard from Janet about the big picture. You'll hear later from Marsha Reichman later this morning what we're doing more operationally in CEDAR and OSC to incorporate Sentinel into our review processes. I think what's different now from, say, 7 or 8 years ago is that while we always had observational data available for use, and we did use observational data for formal epidemiologic studies, each time we used it, we had to, in some ways, reinvent the wheel. We had to start from the beginning and develop statistical programs, protocols, find the data, et cetera. Now we have a system that has done that through its distributed data network, through the common data model, through the development of the types of programs that you'll hear about from Marcia later today, or perhaps from Rich Platt. We can use these data much more effectively, and I think it establishes observational data as a very important component of our post-market drug safety work. It's one tool in our toolbox. We still rely very heavily on old-fashioned adverse event reports. The MedWatch system, where people can write into us or to companies, and then companies send us these reports. Our last analysis was they account for 50% of our safety-related label changes. So they're still important, but I think this is a very powerful tool in our toolbox.
Thanks, Gerald, for the big picture from CEDAR. I'd now like to turn to Steve Anderson to talk about how CBER is using the Sentinel system for monitoring the safety of vaccines, blood products, and biologics.
All right, well, thank you very much. So I was going to also pick up the theme of how we're integrating Sentinel into our regulatory processes. So we've been expanding what I'm calling the CBER Sentinel enterprise, and expanding its organizational structure within the center and its organizational reach. We're increasing our staff in order to sort of better man Sentinel and using the Sentinel system to address specific regulatory questions, address our responsibilities in the regulatory arena. Several of the changes that we've made make the system sort of a more center-wide endeavor rather than an office-based endeavor. It was sort of more office-focused when it was mini Sentinel. Our sort of twist on the management of it is to move it more up so that it's managed by my office, Office of Biostatistics and Epidemiology, but it's also a shared resource for the center to conduct safety studies. So. And what does that mean? So we have our product office colleagues that we're now directly participating as members of the Sentinel study teams. They're providing valuable input, that valuable review perspective on the questions that could be addressed and the types of studies we could use. And then also our OBE colleagues, my product office colleagues in the center, are also engaged in sort of committees at the center level to do more prioritization and also drive decision-making for the Sentinel system. So we've got a lot that we're sort of doing as we've shifted into the Sentinel system as far as organizationally. We're also doing training that will come online later this year. Again, that's really to engage the staff, educate them on Sentinel and how it can be used in the regulatory work. We're calling that right now CBER Sentinel 101. But again, it's a way to sort of get people more engaged in the center. There's a lot of interest in Sentinel throughout the center, and I think the training will help sort of inculcate some of the, and also propagate more interest in using it in the regulatory mission. So again, how are we specifically using Sentinel? Well, Sentinel queries, the studies, are considered in our pre-licensure reviews. So as we're going through the BLA process, our safety people on the committees from the office are considering how might Sentinel be used. And it might be to answer general questions, so a general safety study. It might be in lieu doing Sentinel studies in lieu of doing things like post-marketing commitments. Where we have specific safety concerns, we might do a Sentinel study or query focused analysis in lieu of doing a post-market requirement. So following on to that, what happens in the post-market setting, in the peri-approval setting, so for the first 18 months We're obviously using Sentinel queries, again, to inform the safety of those new products. And then finally, sort of the longer term, this is a surveillance system, a long-term surveillance system. So any questions that arise later on after a product's been on the market, we're using Sentinel to study that. I wanted to shift to talk about some of the future aspects since Janet's talked about where their thinking is. Our thinking is we're very excited. People are going to talk this afternoon and later this morning about the HCA inpatient data. That's going to add immense capabilities to our abilities to monitor the safety of the blood supply. Most transfusions occur in the hospital setting. So this is a game changer for us because we didn't have this capability before, but now we do. So we're really excited about having that additional capability. And that's coming online, and it's in development, and I think we're nearing the final stages where we're able to use those data. The other is signal identification capabilities. So Martin Kaldorf and Azadeh Shwabi are going to talk about how we're using TreeScan, which is a data mining tool. That takes us into the realm of signal identification, which is an area, I mean, we've largely used Sentinel for signal resolution and refinement. We're now moving the system into something where we can do signal identification. So we're very excited again to bring that capability online. It's still in development, but we've moved it to pilot, and now we're just getting ready, I think, to operationalize it. Finally, another area that I'll add, well, not finally, I have two more points. But adding elements to the common data model for us, that means like zip code information. And specifically, we want to use the system in a unique way that it maybe wasn't envisioned, which is to track emerging infectious diseases. And I think the one that's on everybody's breath right now is obviously the Zika virus. And for us, these are issues that revolve and impact blood safety. So by adding this type of information, we can use this in a new way that it probably wasn't envisioned for tracking emerging infectious diseases and inform blood safety policies. And then finally, Janet mentioned the Guardian system as a sort of a parallel system for doing effectiveness type work potentially. Our center is engaged and has done one study using CMS data to evaluate high-dose influenza vaccine. That was a very successful sort of pilot study, and obviously we'd like to carry on that work in the Sentinel system. And that's, I think I've said enough, so I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Steve. Great overview. And I'd like to turn next to Greg Pappas, who's a relatively new addition at CDRH, doing some relatively new but very large-scale activities related to device surveillance. Very pleased as part of the Duke Margolis Center to be involved in with many other groups in a national effort to try to get to a higher level of device evidence development. So Greg, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. It's a great opportunity to speak here today. I have three things I'd like to share with you. First of all, I'd like to position devices within the learning healthcare system, which we think of as a network of networks. I'd like to also then talk about CDRH's enthusiasm for the expansion of Sentinel and ways in which we envision being able to leverage the resources, the national resource there, to answer questions in the device space. And third, I want to say a little bit about future steps also, things that we see coming up in the near future. First of all, the device space work, we call this a National Medical Evaluation System or National Evaluation System for Medical Devices. The name's a bit fluid right now. I'll say more about that. But we see it very much as a node in a network of networks and as part of a learning healthcare system. And our core data strategy that we're currently using very much makes the point. So in the device space, we have unique challenges and unique resources. We don't have a UDI that is currently in claims or in electronic medical records, a very important agenda for the future, but we are able to uniquely identify devices in registries. So for many of our important devices, implantables, we have registries, and our core data strategy is a linked registry approach. We have been using linked registries. We start with a registry, we identify a cohort, and then we link it to claims data. This is what we've been doing in the past. to provide us with outcome data. We've used this approach to support regulatory decision-making. Studies have been done that have led to label expansions. There are a series of post-approval studies that are using this technique. We've done signal identification. And very exciting, we have a pre-market study going into the field this spring called RAPID. It's in the peripheral vascular device space, where we're randomizing a device nested in a registry, and then linking that data with longitudinal data coming from claims. Very exciting. It does many things for us. It helps us achieve our mantra, better, faster, cheaper. We're looking at devices, and some of these devices we're studying 90% of the people who received the device, not a small sample, but a diverse population that has actually received device. We're able to enroll people much more quickly into these studies, and we are able to do it at a relatively modest cost compared to a freestanding study. So we're very excited about this core data strategy that's in use currently. Our system has foundations, tools, infrastructure, and some use cases, not as well developed because of the limitations I mentioned. The second piece is our excitement about utilization of Sentinel and the expansion of Sentinel within this context of a network of networks. We have, CDRH has a contract, actually it's an agreement, that we awarded in October of last year to a university to link a registry, this is actually in the orthopedic and vascular space, with Sentinel and PCORI. So we've done it we're doing it routinely with claims data out of CMS, and obviously there are technical issues that need to work through, but maybe at our next meeting next year, we can hear a report about how this exciting work's going forward. So as Dr. Woodcock has said for many years, Sentinel will be a resource for all of us to use, and we are very excited about that. Finally, I'll just say a word about where we're going in the future. A lot of work to be done with registries. Registries, some of them are very mature and we're using them, but bringing all registries up to regulatory grade, that is good enough for FDA to use, is an important effort. If you're interested in this issue, you can look on the MD EpiNet website, our public-private partnership, and look at the registry task force, which has a series of recommendations of how to move that industry forward. Second, implementation of UDI. We're doing very exciting work in the area of devices that are implantable. We're not able to do that kind of work in areas of devices, multi-use devices, scopes, that don't have registries, and they won't have registries. And so we need to promote the UDI in claims. And then finally, we're excited about standing up a coordinating center. Our approach has been a little different. We kind of have held back on a coordinating center per se, doing the work, kind of an artisanal approach to it, doing important little studies or big studies, but as a one-off kind of artistic effort, and moving that into an industrial production is where we want to go with a coordinating center, which we hope to stand up this summer. So with that, I'd like to thank you.
Great, Greg. Thanks. Lots going on at CDRH related to these surveillance and other activities too. I'd like to come back to that. One of the things that I think you all mentioned is the reflection of the importance of these types of Sentinel and the programs that it's increasingly linking to. Reflection of that is the structural changes that seem to be occurring in how Sentinel type information is incorporated. So Janet, Gerald, maybe you could start, and then Steve, I'll ask you the same kind of question. You all both described changes in how Sentinel is housed within the agency, this move from mini Sentinel to Sentinel, and I don't know if that means that we're going to have mega Sentinel in a few years. But does it, in all seriousness, does this mean that Sentinel is becoming a mature, well-integrated part of regulatory processes? And is there anything you can add about for people who are developing products or consumers who are concerned about safety, about how you see the fit of Sentinel into the pre-market and post-market regulatory processes? I presume that's a part of the reason for the structural changes.
So let me start with that. So yes, as Janet mentioned, we announced last year that the overall operational responsibility came over to my office, and that transition's been complete. But it clearly does not mean that this is located in one office. First of all, it's a resource for the entire medical product sector of the agency. So Steve, Greg, and I work quite closely together on this. Within CEDAR, we've really had to educate lots of people about what these data are and how they can use them. This isn't just the province of a small group of epidemiologists and statisticians who focus just on Sentinel all day. We need them involved in every analysis we do because of their expertise in that area. But we've had to provide training to all our pharmacists who look at adverse event reports, to the physicians in the Office of New Drugs who are responsible for safety in those particular review divisions, so that we can fully integrate this. We can't integrate this if people don't understand what the data are, what the system it is, the things it can do, the things it can't do, just like any other data resource we have. So and then we need to hear back from them about what future improvements might be, so that it can answer a growing set of questions. And we work with Greg and we work with Steve and their teams on this. So it's mainly used in the post-approval space because it's you have to have a product marketed to have data on it in Sentinel. But as we look in the pre-market period, during the review period, toward the end of the review cycle, when we're starting to figure out what we might want to monitor, it's understanding the capabilities of Sentinel that are important in planning that post-market monitoring.
Sure. So I'll say for our office and the center, I think that this scale-up really is a long-term process. So I think we're sort of on the beginning of the journey, and I would say the infrastructure that I proposed is under development and it's being implemented. I would say we're 50% of the way through where our first phase is. But I think it's my most important part is really, I think I'll echo some of what Gerald has said, is educating the staff. That's the biggest job, and really engaging them, because right now, during a BLA, we'll be sitting in the room and they'll turn to us to ask us applications. And what I want is for people to be able to have an idea of what those applications are, so they can help us better answer those questions and the questions of regulatory concern. So that's really sort of our major goal and effort, is really, again, it's like bringing it out of our office and sort of preaching the word, spreading the word to the product offices. It sounds sort of hokey, but we're probably going to spend most of our effort doing that over the next months and years. The other part is also engaging the office leadership and center leadership in decision making around priorities, because we come up with many different priorities, 20 different proposals for protocol-based assessments. Our office has had to winnow down some of those, and what we'd like to do is, this is a shared center process by which to do that. So again, I think this is a valuable tool. We're still learning how to use it like everybody else, and I think the more we educate our staff and other center staffs on how to use it, I think the better off we'll be, better job we can do on our surveillance job.
Thanks. And Greg, structural changes related to this kind of evidence development also taking place at CDRH. In fact, you're a product of that.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, this is my 1-year anniversary. My first day on the job at the FDA was this meeting, the last mini-Sentinel meeting. Analogous to Steve and Gerald, we are working to bring this knowledge or these new tools to the staff. Actually, CDRH has elevated this establishment of a national medical device evaluation system to a strategic priority for our center. So it's a center-wide activity where we're trying to engage reviewers on all the various parts of the center, people in compliance, so they can understand if a study comes using a linked registry, what do they do with it? There's a whole series of issues that have to be addressed, working through, while our biostatistics folks have vetted and approved the methodologies that we've used to date. That is an ongoing effort. All aspects of our team have to understand how to use these data, and so it's a major challenge that we're undertaking as a strategic priority for the center. Thanks.
Yeah, and I noticed you were talking about the medical device evaluation system. I remember when CDRH first started talking about this strategic direction. I think the term was medical device surveillance system, and also noted some of the comments on the CDER side as well, with the Guardian notion about moving into effectiveness as well. Do you all want to comment on what seems like to be not only expanded use for safety surveillance and more integration with center activities throughout FDA, but a real move into effectiveness questions too? Greg, do you want to start?
Thanks for the question, because it's an opportunity for me to correct my introduction. So my title is not for surveillance, actually, it's for evaluation. As we've moved, so when we started this effort with some white papers in 2008, it was called a surveillance system. But if you read the report, it was really clear it was a multi-purpose system that was supposed to support surveillance, pre-market studies, signal, the whole gamut of needs for device evaluation. The formal transition to the word evaluation came with the National Registry Task Force that made that transition. So we've migrated with, CDRH has migrated with that report. But it was very much there, but now we're kind of more explicit about it. Surveillance is not being diminished in any way in this effort, but we see the stakeholders understand the clear utility of the system that we're developing for multiple purposes.
Okay, so we are definitely moving into the effectiveness area and using Sentinel. So one area that we have in Sentinel already under development is we have a white paper that we're doing. Essentially, it's a feasibility study on how we can use Sentinel to do effectiveness studies. We've shown that CMS data can effectively be used for effectiveness type studies. We have another set of projects with the herpes zoster vaccine, and we continue work on influenza, since influenza is such an important part of what we do. Plus, doing it in Medicare, obviously that's a good set of data to focus on a disease that highly impacts the elderly. But obviously, our next movement is obviously do more work in Sentinel. We have a number of proposed projects that we were thinking of funding, and we probably will fund those this year, looking at other specific vaccines. But again, it's in developmental phases, and so, but it's moving forward.
We too are interested in CEDAR, how these types of data can be used for evidence generation. And as Steve said, this is in the very, very, very exploratory phases. Melissa Robb from our Office of Medical Policy is going to talk more about that this afternoon. Just that this is very big interest to us and very, very, very early.
Yeah, we all know that that when a medical product reaches the market, there are many, many unanswered questions about its use. Not only about its safety performance, but about its general performance and what populations it could be expanded to and use and so forth. So, and this has plagued us forever, because safety isn't a single standalone issue. It's really benefit risk. And we need to be able to rapidly and inexpensively find out about the actual performance of the product, both for ill and for good, as fast as possible. So these are really two sides of the same coin. We started with safety. That was our statutory mandate. But clearly there's an interest in generating evidence in a much more efficient manner than what we're able to do now, because we're plagued with the same things Gerald described we did with safety. We used it, I can guarantee you we hemorrhaged a very large amount of money to do these standalone epi studies. And as the person who runs the budget in Cedar, I was not too happy with this. So, the money we put into Sentinel, which has been substantial investment, but nevertheless, it's a enduring product of investment rather than these standalone studies, which answered one question, or sometimes, or not infrequently, you were left at the end of the day with a lot of unanswered questions after you spent $10 million and did a standalone epi study. So we got to get better at doing this, and the same pertains, I think, to other questions about product performance beyond pure safety. We got to get better at doing that. We got to get more efficient. We got to get faster, and we have to have answers to these questions in a timely manner. So we're really, that's where we're driving to. But again, it's going to take another effort. It's going to take, there are different parameters involved when you're randomizing subjects or you're doing these kind of studies versus public health surveillance, which is what we've been doing. But we can see the future, and we're going to try to get there.
Great, thanks. Great discussion. We are tight for time, but we do have microphones up at the front if there are any questions before we wrap up this session. Please come forward. Just in time microphones. Great. And please identify who you are when you ask your question.
I'm Tom Moore with the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, and every year I like to ask Dr. Woodcock, can you estimate about how many FTEs and what the budget for Sentinel looks like, either at present or in the future?
I'd have to get back to you on that, but of course I do have, I think, a pretty good idea of, but there are a lot of factors in play that will might influence that over the coming years. But, we put about $10–15 million a year in there, okay? So that's not, if you think of federal, this isn't a really big investment. I don't know what CBER puts in money too. I mean, like I said, we're partners in this, and the FTEs have not been that great internally. Maybe not very large.
And just to be a little provocative, as we're heading into another user fee era, these are the resources for this program are coming from within the overall kind of post-market budget for the centers.
Yeah, so our budget, it's operating. It was really through the largesse originally in our center of Dr. Midtoon to really set aside the money. I think our budget goes anywhere from about $5 to $8 million a year. And as far as FTEs, our FTE allotment and allocation is very small for Sentinel. I would say overall, if we count it across the center for us, it's like 5 to 7. We're just now sort of having a full-time Sentinel person that I'm bringing on board using some of my other FTE allocations. So it's really a run on a shoestring in a way, and that's why we're enlarging the sort of enterprise, because it really needs to, because we're running large portfolios of work that really require people to really man the studies.
And we'll be doing the same, as ramping up the staffing as we get a dedicated unit within sort of OSE to manage this program. It'll become significantly larger. Most of the resources have been external, okay? And that was one of the reasons I think we were billed this efficiently. We didn't use government IT systems.
Very leveraged given the amount of reports and studies and other analyses that are coming out of this. Time for one more question.
Mary Tobin from the Alliance for Clinical Research Excellence and Safety. I was working on the MedWatch program back when Sentinel was just getting started. And it was actually the MedWatch Partners program, and we ran into all kinds of problems because a lot of the partners wanted to help the FDA, and we couldn't legally get around that. Has that been answered for Sentinel? I mean, rather than just having lots of partners out there that give you data, can they give you other stuff for free?
Well, there's something called the Anti-Deficiency Act that Congress passed that I will not take time to explain, but the short answer is no. The long answer is we have the Reagan-Udall Foundation, we have the IMEDS project within this, and we're seeking a public-private partnership to work on, right now, to work on analytical methods to address these data. So we're seeking to build a public-private partnership that will enable people to contribute.
I want to thank you all for a great discussion, and we're going to come back to some of these same themes and issues later in the day. Thank you very much. All right, next we're going to move right into another very important address. Just as we have a few other traditions now, it seems, in these annual Sentinel meetings, like Tom Moore's question about resources for Sentinel, one very special, what I hope will be a tradition, is the State of Sentinel talk from Rich Platt. Rich, my friend and colleague, is professor and chair of the Department of Population Medicine at Harvard Medical School, the executive director of the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute, and his claim to fame right now this morning is as the principal investigator of the Sentinel system, who many of you know has been a regular speaker at these workshops, but more importantly, the integral force over the years that has driven the development of the Sentinel vision and the implementation of this vision as a true public-private partnership. Most of the data that's housed, the analyses that, or the pieces of analyses that are conducted doesn't happen at FDA, and that's one reason why those FDA budget numbers that you heard were so small relative to the volume and quality and comprehensiveness across the population of the Sentinel activities that are being undertaken. So, Rich, we're very pleased to have you back with us this year to provide an overview of some of the major accomplishments over the past year, prelude to what's in store, and what I hope is also your tradition of rolling the credits that's longer than the Oscars. Is that still going to have that this time?
That list, thanks, Mark. That list got too long. I have to say it. It took about 12 seconds to run, and it took 2 days to create. And so I'll wait for the last slide there, but not the credits. So Mark and Janet and Gerald and Steve and Greg have made my job very easy this morning, because all I have to do is a little explication of the comments that they've made. I'll spend the first few minutes on the basics of Sentinel if you haven't been part of the last 7 annual meetings. That is, in the 3 domains that FDA is interested in having Sentinel work in, we have concentrated our effort in this middle domain, signal refinement, being able to do initial evaluation of safety concerns, and we focused on building a series of capabilities that let us do that. We have started to expand in both directions in the data mining and protocol-based evaluation areas. But if you ask where's the center of gravity been, it's been in developing these tools that can go from there's a question about whether the agency should be concerned and devote considerable resources to being able to give an answer fairly quickly. Looks like there's nothing here, or there does seem to be something that deserves additional attention. Sentinel is comprised of 2 main sets of partners. There are organizations that either provide care or pay for care, and they are both scientific partners and data partners. So that's that middle layer there. And we also have a number of organizations that are partners because they have scientists who can provide high-quality content expertise for us. The Operations Center is in my home shop at the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute, which is where we house a department of Harvard Medical School. A real foundation of the Sentinel system is a distributed network that we and our partners have created that allows the FDA to ask questions of organizations that have data that has useful information without those organizations, while those organizations maintain complete control over the data. They maintain physical control over the data, and they maintain operational control. So the way that we do that is by negotiation, decide on a standard format of the data, which we call a common data model. Each organization transforms its data into the common data model. We do a substantial amount of quality checking, and then those data stay with the organizations and are available to be used to answer questions, and those questions are asked in the form of computer programs that are distributed. So having made the transformation, one program can run in each organization and provide an answer. Those answers are almost always just numbers, and so there's a very high level of protection of the confidentiality of the individuals whose data are underlying this system. These little fire cartoons are the firewalls for each of these organizations. So they are protected with the same level of protection as the original medical record and claims data of these organizations. Every organization that participates is doing so on a voluntary basis. And the understanding with each of our data partners is they know what the questions are. They can decide on a case-by-case basis whether they're prepared to answer that question. They can see what the answers are before they return them. In the act, this is a coalition of the willing, and essentially every query that FDA asks is responded to. I had a request to show this slide again this year. It's emblematic of the care that we exercise in making sure that individuals' data is protected. That is, what's interesting here is the information, not the data. And of course, I am reminded to show that because you can see this is long dark hair, that this is not a picture of me that was taken recently. Okay, Mark has already said that there are lots that the distributed data set is now quite large and is robust enough to address a substantial number of questions. So like McDonald's, there are millions and billions. It's substantial enough that we're now able to talk with reasonable precision about a substantial amount of medically attended care. So remember, the foundation for this is care that comes to medical attention and is chronicled somehow, for instance, because somebody paid for it. We have spent this past year focusing on these 8 activities. I'm going to fly through them in the next few minutes. First, on standardizing our engagement with FDA programs and teams, I'm not actually going to talk about that because I think each of the preceding speakers has talked about the fact that we see a major piece of our job now to understand how Sentinel can actually be useful to our FDA colleagues on a day-to-day operational basis, and that's a substantial lift. And you heard the description about the work on the FDA side for that, and we're doing our level best to sort of learn where the engagement points need to be and the ways in which we can be helpful. We are submitting between 1 and 2 reports a week now to FDA. They arise from very rapid queries that we call summary tables, and you get an answer in a few days to certain kinds of questions. How many people of what age and gender have been exposed to a particular product? Or within the entire system, how often do you see specific diagnoses over time by age, by gender, by data partner? The modular programs are increasingly sophisticated, reusable programs that we build in response to repeated questions. So when it appears to FDA that a particular kind of question is going to arise time after time, then we talk about converting it into a tool that we can use repeatedly. We've already heard that we have 17 active protocols. These are not quick. These are questions that are answerable, but require, first of all, a group that sits and thinks together about understanding FDA's question, understanding how the data partners may be able to address that, developing a protocol, and then writing new programs that can answer those. Sometimes it's necessary to actually to review some full-text medical records in order to understand either exposures or to confirm outcomes. This is a list of some of the protocols that are underway for the Center for Biologics. I specifically want to call out this first one, this transfusion-associated lung injury protocol, because it's our first foray into really understanding a blood product safety question that was unavailable to us before. So it's both an important question, and it's one that's teaching us how to be able to study this question. These are some of the protocols that the Center for Drugs is putting forward, and if you've been here for several years, you'll recognize these first couple as ones that have been in progress for quite a while. We're both answering an important question here, and these have, among other things, have been the driver for our understanding what kinds of reusable programs we need to build. And so I think that Marcia Reichman will talk about applying some of these new tools to very quickly get an answer that is close to the kind of results that can come from these very detailed protocol-based studies. So in the schema of moving from we could never do this study at all to it takes us several years to do this study to now in several months we can get something that is close to the answer that might come from a very detailed study is one that is a developmental theme for us. Janet talked about the fact that both Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts and Hospital Corporation of America are now operational data partners. I specifically want to call out the Hospital Corporation of America. Jeff Brown is going to talk in more detail about this in a bit, but HCA is a new kind of data partner for us. It is responsible for about 5% of the inpatient hospitalizations in the U.S. through a network of 168 hospitals. That's millions of inpatient hospitalizations, tens of millions of emergency department visits. There is a central data warehouse. There's a fully integrated electronic health record system, and a much more efficient way to be able to review full text records when that's a valuable thing to do. Janet also mentioned the fact that last year the PCORNet Clinical Data Research Networks became official collaborators as part of the Sentinel system. These are organizations that deliver care and build their activities on electronic health records, and we've spent a considerable amount of time in this past year in understanding how we can take best advantage of these organizations. And so we have this very exciting white paper that's now on our website, and the title doesn't do justice to exactly how exciting this is. But the question is, these organizations have very rich electronic health records, which ideally should be linked to the claims data that Sentinel has been using. And we spent months talking about what would be involved in being able to do that linkage. So this is really our blueprint and roadmap for being able to start to address this really important long-term issue that I think is vital to taking Sentinel and PCORNet to sort of really full and exciting capabilities. We have continued to expand our analytical capabilities. As I've said, we have tried very hard to work with FDA to understand where are the priorities for things that need to be done more than once. And so we have been adding to this set of tools. We've been building a program to first teach FDA staff what these tools are and how they can be used. And one of our high priority items for this year is to be able to make these training resources available to the public at large. We post all these tools on our website, but it takes some real counseling and advice about how to use them well, and we want to be able to make these tools much more generally accessible. These are some of the additional analytic capabilities that are in development. The ones that have the asterisks are ones that are being supported through our Sentinel contract, but they actually come from the P-Core Trust Fund that's administered by the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. So these have been partnerships with our FDA colleagues to be able to access these resources to build capabilities that are both useful for Sentinel, but as a requirement for this funding stream have much broader utility. We're also working to understand how the tools we've built actually perform, and I'll just mention two of them. One is we over the past 3 years, we've put a lot of time and energy into building laboratory test result files for Sentinel, not just whether a test was performed, but what the result was. And we've realized that we need to understand how well those tools actually work. The other is to understand in a much more general sense how our comparative tools are performing. In the laboratory results arena, one of the things that we knew coming in was that this was not every laboratory test result that would be of interest in answering a question. Sometimes there is missing data because the test is never performed that you would like to have, and sometimes it's missing because the data set is just incomplete with regard to all the testing that people have. And so we've actually studied in quite detail what the pattern of missingness is, and our recommendations are that for every single study we do where we're interested in using laboratory test results, it's important to sort of characterize what's missing and why it's missing, because the reasons for missingness are terribly important, and that the solutions are going to have to be ones that are relevant both to exactly where is this data coming from and what are we using it for at this moment. In the question of what about the tools that we're actually using, are they giving us the answers that we hope that they will? Last year I showed you an example of our taking our then brand new tool that did comparative propensity score matching, and we applied it to a situation where we had done a protocol-based analysis and showed we got virtually the same answer when we looked for angioedema associated with ACE inhibitors. During the past year, we have done a number of other known positives and gotten answers that have been very gratifying. The question, of course, is, first of all, there are only so many of these you can do. Secondly, there's an interesting question of what's the right answer actually, because when you look in the literature of what's the actual relative risk of C. difficile colitis associated with clindamycin, you get a range of answers, and we'd like to know what the actual, how close we come to the actual right answer. And so the solution to that, at least the one we're pursuing, is to do a simulation program that Bruce Fireman is going to talk about in detail in a bit. But it is a partnership with the Reagan-Udall Foundation using the IMEDS laboratory, and we think that it will be a very good complement to trying to reproduce known positives, to be able to look in great detail at the performance characteristics of the tools that we've built. In the methods development arena, we have a substantial number of programs going. The first three are based on the tree scan statistic that Martin Kulldorff developed. It was, Martin, I think it's the first thing we ever talked about when we met 14 years ago. So just an aside, Martin and I have been colleagues for a very long time, and Martin was a member of our department for 12 years. But that first conversation, Martin said, I've developed this tree scan statistic, and it might be useful for pharmacovigilance. And I said, who are you working with? And he said, nobody. And I said, Martin, come here and work with us. So it's really a great pleasure to see this becoming useful for Sentinel. But there's a wide array of activities that are, I call them, almost all of them are applied methods. We're not trying to invent brand new things. We're trying to take methods that we think can be useful and make them useful for Sentinel. We've already heard about Guardian, this program that Janet described to address non-safety kinds of activities. And I think this is an extraordinarily interesting and promising arena. I'll spend just a minute talking about this clinical trial that for which we're developing a protocol, we're looking at the problem of atrial fibrillation, which I hadn't understood was quite as important a public health problem as it is. But if we are an average population of the US, there are several people in the room who have atrial fibrillation right this minute. Atrial fibrillation greatly increases the risk of stroke. Oral anticoagulation greatly reduces the risk of stroke, and many people for whom anticoagulation is clearly beneficial aren't taking it. So we looked in Sentinel and did a rapid query using our standard tools in 3 of our data partners. And in those 3 data partners, which represent well under half the Sentinel population, we found 200,000 people who had repeated diagnoses of atrial fibrillation plus other risk factors that increase their risk of stroke. And nearly half of them had no record at all of any dispensing of an anticoagulant. So this looks like, it's a terrible problem, but it looks like an opportunity. So last year, I described a work that we had done that it was all theory. Would the Sentinel data partners be together a good environment in which to do randomized trials? Because they'd all had some experience. And the answer was yes. And so now with FDA's encouragement and guidance, we're partnering with the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, which Mark chairs and is sponsored in large part by FDA, to develop the Impact AF trial protocol. So you can tell we're hanging out with cardiologists now because we have a snappy acronym. But this is the plan is to develop a protocol that involves direct-to-member outreach, coupled with outreach to the physicians to point out that the individual may have an indication for anticoagulation, and encouraging the individual, first of all, to look at additional resources that are on a website, and then consult with his or her clinician. So I hope that next year I can tell you that study is well underway. We are also doing a lot of work to partner with non-FDA, with others than FDA. This is a slide that Janet has used over the years, showing the many groups that, or sectors that FDA had in mind as users. And we're making a lot of progress on this. She also talked about wanting to to be able to do randomized trials. So just to go a level deeper in how this could work, there isn't a monolithic Sentinel resource. There are individual organizations that choose to participate in some activities but not others. And so our view is each organization can participate in any networks it chooses to. What I've shown here is Sentinel, PCORNet, and the NIH's Clinical Trials Science Award program. But each network controls its own governance. So there's Sentinel governance, and that's Public Health Authority. But PCORNet and NIH are covered under the common rule and have IRBs approving them. But there's a lot of benefit from sharing infrastructure and data curation and software development, things like that. So each one doesn't have to build its own. Working with PCORNet, we're doing a number of activities. I mentioned the data linkage work that we're doing with the Sentinel, with their data partners. There are 3 demonstration projects underway from PCORNet now, a large clinical trial and 2 observational studies. And our expectation is that we'll be able to have the clinical data research networks partner with the Sentinel organizations to do the kind of follow-up that can come from the claims data. With the NIH Collaboratory, almost all of the Sentinel data partners are now in a position to work with the NIH Collaboratory's distributed research network. We've done 3 proof of principle queries for NIH. Kathy Myers will be talking later today about that, but we think that we are poised to be able to be an important resource for NIH. I am delighted that we have successfully concluded a first study with IMEDS, the Reagan-Udall Foundation's program to support industry-sponsored studies, and I know Troy McCall will be talking about that. We're also working with the Biologics and Biosimilars Collective Intelligence Consortium to create the capability to do post-marketing surveillance for biosimilars. And thanks to Mark's facilitation, we're well along in conversation with the CDC about a proof of principle program to look at hepatitis C management. And Susan Hariri, I think, will talk about that later today. So 8 years later, Sentinel's in pretty good shape. There are two strong examples of industry-initiated queries. We have a platform for working with industry, with PCORNet, with the CDC, and the Impact AF trial. So I think we have a clear, good start on that process. The last thing I'll say is we realize we have always thought that it was important to be transparent and make sure the public understands what's going on. And so we built a public website that only a Sentinel investigator's mother would really like. We've also published in the scientific literature, but I'd say we have not stepped up to the plate on really communicating with the public or even with the people whose data are the foundation for what we're doing. So Steve Makita has been leading a work group of engagement partners to address the problem that Sentinel is still largely unknown. We've taken a first step. We've redesigned our website. So this will be going live pretty soon. It's mobile friendly, and we're hoping that the messages will be. Okay, this is a repeat slide, so I'm not going to go through this, but the key contributors to Sentinel's success, I think, are the same this year as they've been for the past several years. There is no substitute for close, frequent interactions between the FDA, data partners, clinical experts, epidemiologists, statisticians. 11 of my colleagues from the Operations Center are here today, and if you have questions or ideas, it would be great if you would talk to them. Can I ask you to raise your hands just so folks can come and look for you during the coffee break? So they're sort of pretty much concentrated over in the back here. And then I think FDA has really been very wise in sort of defining incremental goals so that we can try out an idea, see if it works. If it does, then we can build on it. The additional things that have emerged as we've been working are, first of all, healthcare is changing and healthcare data systems are changing at such a rapid speed that everything we do has to be reevaluated pretty much every week. Secondly, data that's good for some things isn't good for other things, and we have to be really attentive to know when you can answer a question that's important. Third, the methods have to be extremely clear and transparent and readily interpretable. I'd say every time we've taken a step forward, we've been a little bit surprised about something we hadn't anticipated. And a big part of our future is going to be linking electronic health record data and claims data and registry data. It is very, very, very challenging. It's going to be an ongoing challenge in the environment that we work in. Okay, so I'm over time. I just want to say that last year I humble bragged because Bruce Pasady, who's in the audience, published a perspective in the New England Journal saying we were doing a good job. And this year, I'll say this is the interim assessment that Janet mentioned, and I'll cherry pick three comments from it. She said it said pretty good, and here are some things you can work on, and I'll just concentrate on the pretty good. FDA, with its many Sentinel partners, has made substantial progress. Sentinel complements FDA's post-marketing surveillance of drugs and vaccines, and Sentinel enables FDA to understand better and estimate the incidence of risks in a relevant population. So if you said 8 years ago, what would be a good place to be in by now, I'd say I didn't think we'd be this far along, so I'm really delighted. So instead of the roll the credits, I'll just have to say thanks to the 60 people at the Sentinel Operations Center who are the engines, the people who make this work with FDA, and the hundreds of investigators at the partner organizations who are really the heart and soul of what's going on. So thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich. And it really is quite a diverse team with a shared commitment making a big difference in this project. We don't really have time for much comments given how much ground you covered. I did want to ask one question, though, picking up on that last slide summarizing the FDA's interim report on Sentinel. You talked about a lot of the progress and a lot of the reasons for progress. What do you see as 2 or 3 of the biggest challenges right now that, looking forward, if we could make more progress on these challenges or obstacles, would help Sentinel have an even bigger impact?
So Mark, I'd say operationally, it's the issue that that Gerald and Steve and Greg have talked about. We have to learn to speak FDA because I think we have the capability to address a substantial number of questions for FDA, and we have to be able to we have to be able to translate their needs into things that we can do. And so I think we need to spend more time with our FDA colleagues. So I'd say that's one. Second is understanding how to really unlock the potential of electronic health records. There's an enormous amount of data that is in them, and there are lots of obstacles to using it well. So it's so I'd say if you ask what are the 2 big things that I'd like to make progress on, I'd say it's those.
And it was nice to see the coming redesigned website. There's maybe one more to add to that, as there is so much going on with Sentinel now that it really is time for, I think, a higher level of public awareness and public engagement and where what this program is doing and where it goes from here.
Right, and I think Steve's going to be talking later about sort of how that work group is tackling that job of making it bringing the public in as a real partner in this.
Well, Rich, thanks for your leadership on all this effort. It's been quite a journey, and nice to hear about all the progress. Thank you again. Now, we are going to take a short break now. We'll be resuming at 10:45 for our next session and pick up on some of the themes that Rich was just talking about. Thank you.